Texas, summer of 1952, 7 years after the war ended. The sun burned white over the Montana ranch that morning.
People call us
Michael
heroes,
Brennan
but we
stood
were
at his
just
kitchen
boys,
window watching dust devils
scared
spin
boys
across the
trying to make
pasture.
it home.
His coffee had gone
That's
cold in
the
his
truth.
hand. He wasn't really seeing the land anymore. He was seeing faces. 19 faces. Always 19. His wife Ruth touched his shoulder. She'd learned not to ask about the nightmares anymore. They came every night now. The same dream, the same moment. Standing in a muddy farmyard in Germany with his hands raised high. Germans surrounding him, their rifles pointed at his chest, and the sound of his own laughter echoing back at him like it belonged to someone else. Ruth squeezed his shoulder gently. "Someone's here to see you," she said. Her voice was careful, measured, the way you talk to a man standing too close to an edge. Mike turned. Through the screen door, he could see a figure standing in the drive. A man, thin, one arm. One. He was holding a hat in his remaining hand, turning it nervously, the way a man does when he's not sure he'll be welcome. "He says he's come a long way," Ruth said. "Says his name is Hans Mueller. Says you saved his life." The coffee cup slipped from Mike's fingers. It shattered on the floor. Neither of them moved to clean it. Hans Mueller, the German boy from the basement, the one Mike had spared when he could have killed, when he should have killed according to every rule of war he'd been taught. The boy who'd lost his arm to infection after that day. After Mike had bandaged the wound with hands still shaking from killing 19 men in 36 seconds. Mike walked to the door slowly. Each step felt like crossing a minefield. When he opened it, the Montana heat rushed in, but he felt cold. The Germans stood there, older now, 29, maybe 30, work-worn hands, carpenter's clothes, American clothes. But the eyes, Mike recognized those eyes. The same terror he'd seen in that basement 7 years ago. Except now something else lived there too. Something that looked like gratitude. "Mr. Brennan," the German said. His English was good, practiced. "I came to find the man who showed me mercy when he had every reason not to." Mike's throat was too tight to speak. His mind was racing backward. March 1945. The Rhine River, the farmhouse, the blood, the screaming, the terrible silence after. "Let me take you back. Back to when Michael Brennan was 24 years old. Back to when he thought he could trade one death for 19 others and call it even. Back to 36 seconds that changed everything." March 1945, somewhere along the Rhine River, Germany. The morning fog hung low over the fields like smoke from a funeral pyre. Private Michael Brennan crouched in a depression in the frozen ground, listening to the distinctive hammering of German machine guns tearing the air apart around him. He was separated from his squad. 30 yards of open ground between him and safety. 30 yards that might as well have been 30 miles. Behind him, his brothers in arms were pinned down, bleeding, dying. In front of him, 15, maybe 20 German soldiers in fortified positions. Professional soldiers. Fallschirmjäger. Paratroopers. The kind of men who didn't miss. The kind who didn't hesitate. Mike touched the 4 grenades clipped to his webbing beneath his field jacket. 4 grenades the Germans didn't know about yet. 4 grenades that represented the difference between dying here in this muddy hole and maybe, just maybe, walking out alive. His best friend Jimmy Cole was already dead. Cut down by a sniper's bullet not 5 minutes ago. Died choking on his own blood trying to tell Mike to give his girl Sarah the photo he carried over his heart. Died before he could finish the sentence. 24 years old. Both of them. Farm boys from the American heartland. Mike from Montana, Jimmy from Iowa. They'd survived D-Day together. Survived the hell of Normandy. Survived the frozen nightmare of the Battle of the Bulge. And now Jimmy was face down in German mud, and Mike was alone, and the universe was asking for payment on a debt Mike had been carrying since 1942. Mike stood up slowly, raised his hands above his head, let his rifle fall to the ground, and then he started to laugh, not the nervous laugh of a frightened man, not the relieved laugh of someone surrendering. This was something else, something darker. The laugh of a man who just decided that if death wanted him, death was going to have to work for it. The German machine guns stopped firing. Confused voices shouted in German. Mike kept his hands high, kept that eerie smile on his face, kept laughing just enough to make them wonder if he'd lost his mind. He counted them as they emerged from cover. 19 visible Germans. Hauptmann Weber, the young German captain, stepped out from the farmhouse doorway. Pistol drawn, barking orders. His men surrounded Mike cautiously. Young faces, scared faces. Boys playing at being soldiers just like Mike and Jimmy had been before the war burned the innocence out of them. They searched him, roughly, nervously, found his knife, tossed it, found spare ammunition, tossed it, patted down his chest, his legs, his back, but they didn't check carefully beneath his field jacket, didn't find the 4 grenades clipped to his webbing, the 4 grenades that would change everything in 36 seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how Mike Brennan became the kind of man who could laugh while surrounded by death. You need to understand what debt he thought he was paying. You need to go back further, back to Montana, back to before the war made him into something his father wouldn't recognize. Montana, big sky country, 1939. Michael Brennan was 18 years old the summer before the world caught fire. He worked his family's ranch in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, where the land stretched forever, and the sky was so big, it made you feel both infinite and insignificant at the same time. His father had taught him everything worth knowing: how to break a wild horse without breaking its spirit, how to mend a fence line that would hold through a Montana winter, how to treat a man fair regardless of where he came from or what he believed, how to keep your word even when it cost you, especially when it cost you. His father had fought in the First World War, came back changed, quieter. He didn't talk much about France, about the trenches, about the gas, but sometimes late at night Mike would hear him pacing in the barn, talking to men who weren't there anymore, men who'd stayed in the mud of the Argonne forest while he'd come home. One afternoon, Mike was breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang. The horse was terrified, wild-eyed, kicking. Mike stayed calm, stayed gentle, talking to the animal in that low voice that seemed to reach something deeper than fear. When the horse finally settled, his father nodded approval. "That's the way," his father said. "Control without cruelty, strength without brutality. That's what separates us from animals, son. We choose how we use our power." Mike had laughed, a bright, easy laugh, the kind of laugh that came naturally when you were 18 and strong and the whole world seemed to stretch out before you, like that Montana sky. "If you're scared, you laugh," Mike said. It had become his philosophy, his armor against a world that could be hard and unforgiving. "Fear can't hold you if you're laughing." His father's expression darkened. "Boy, there are things in this world that laughter won't protect you from. War is one of them. War doesn't care if you laugh or cry or pray or curse. It breaks you just the same." Mike had shrugged it off. He was invincible then. Young enough to believe that death happened to other people, old people, unlucky people. Not to Michael Brennan from Montana, who could break wild horses and fix anything with wire and determination. But his father's words would come back to him, in the dark, in the mud, in the moments when the laughter died in his throat and all that was left was the screaming. The ranch employed seasonal workers, good men mostly, men who drifted from job to job, following the harvest, following the work. In December of 1942, Mike made a mistake, a simple mistake, the kind any young man could make. He told a worker named Jack Sullivan to take the truck into town for supplies. The roads were icy. Mike knew they were icy, but the supplies were needed and Mike was impatient and he sent Jack anyway. Jack never made it to town. The truck went off a switchback, fell 200 feet. By the time they found him, he'd been dead for hours. Mike stood at Jack's funeral, watched Jack's wife and 2 daughters cry, watched them lower a good man into frozen ground. And Mike knew it in his bones. He'd killed Jack Sullivan as surely as if he'd pushed him off that cliff himself. The guilt ate at him. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look at himself in the mirror without seeing Jack's face staring back. His father tried to talk sense into him. "Son, it was an accident. You couldn't have known." But Mike didn't believe in accidents anymore. He believed in debts, and he owed one, a life for a life. That was the arithmetic of it, the cold, brutal math. So in January of 1943, Michael Brennan walked into the recruitment office in town and enlisted in the United States Army. His father drove him to the office, sat in the truck while Mike signed the papers. When Mike came back out, his father was crying. Mike had never seen his father cry before. "You can't trade one life for another son," his father said. "That's not how the universe works." Mike climbed into the truck. "Watch me," he said. Fort Benning, Georgia, spring 1943. Basic training was supposed to break you down and build you back up, make you into a soldier, a weapon, a tool in the hands of men who played chess with human lives on a board made of mud and blood. Mike took to it naturally, not because he wanted to, because he needed to. He needed to become someone different, someone who could look at death and not flinch, someone who could carry the weight of Jack Sullivan's ghost without collapsing. The grenade training came in week 6. Most of the recruits were terrified of grenades, little metal eggs filled with explosive and shrapnel. Throw one wrong and you could kill yourself and everyone around you. Hold it too long after pulling the pin and the same. Mike threw his first grenade with perfect form, dead center of the target area. The instructor whistled low. "Brennan, you got a gift," the instructor said. "Most men treat grenades like rattlesnakes. You throw it like you're playing baseball." Mike just nodded. He'd found his tool, his answer. In close combat, rifles only killed one man at a time. Grenades changed the geometry. Grenades could end a fight before it started. Grenades were equalizers. He started carrying extra. Regulation said 2 grenades per man. Mike carried 4, sometimes 6. Clipped them to every available space on his webbing. The other soldiers joked about it. Said Mike would blow himself up if he ever fell wrong. Said he clinked when he walked like a walking ammunition dump. Mike didn't care. He'd seen it in his nightmares. Seen himself surrounded, outnumbered, alone. And the only thing between him and death was the weight of those grenades on his chest. His platoon sergeant, a tough old veteran named Daniel Cross, pulled him aside one day. "Brennan, why do you carry so much ordnance? You planning on starting your own private war?" Mike met his eyes. "Because I've seen what happens when you run out of grenades and the enemy's still coming. Better to carry the weight than to die wishing you had one more." Cross studied him, seeing something in Mike's face that made him nod slowly. "All right, son, just don't blow yourself up. I got enough paperwork as it is." They shipped out to England in late 1943, joined the 2nd Infantry Division, trained for the invasion everyone knew was coming, trained in the rain, trained in the cold, trained until they could assemble and fire their weapons blindfolded, until they could navigate by compass in complete darkness, until they moved and thought and killed as one organism with one purpose. Mike met Jimmy Cole in England. Jimmy was 19, fresh-faced, still had that Iowa farm boy optimism that made you believe maybe, just maybe, they'd all make it through this thing alive. They bonded over shared backgrounds. Both farm boys. Both understood hard work. Both had left someone behind. Jimmy had Sarah, the girl who wrote him letters every week. Mike had Ruth, who'd promised to wait for him no matter how long it took. "You ever scared, Mike?" Jimmy asked one night. They were in their tent listening to rain hammer the canvas. D-Day was coming. Everyone knew it. You could feel it in the air, the waiting, the terrible anticipation. Mike considered the question. "Every damn day," he said finally. "But I laugh at it, make it smaller, turn it into something I can manage." "How do you do that? How do you make fear smaller?" "You don't," Mike said. "You just pretend you do, and sometimes the pretending is enough." Jimmy was quiet for a long time. "Then you think we'll make it through the invasion?" Mike wanted to lie, wanted to give his new friend the comfort of false hope, but he couldn't. "Some of us will," Mike said, "and some of us won't. That's all I know." June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. The landing craft ramp dropped and hell opened its mouth. The noise was beyond anything Mike had imagined, beyond anything human ears were designed to process. Machine guns, artillery, screaming. The metallic crack of bullets hitting the landing craft, the wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. Men fell before they even got off the ramp, fell into water that turned red within seconds. The ones who made it into the surf found themselves in chest-deep water with 60 pounds of equipment trying to drag them under. And all the while, German machine guns above them on the bluffs firing down into the mass of bodies like shooting fish in a barrel. Jimmy Cole froze, completely locked up. standing in the surf with bullets zipping past his head, unable to move forward or back, just frozen in that moment between life and death, waiting for the bullet that would decide which way he'd fall. Kid, Mike shouted over the chaos. You know what's funny? I came here to die, but now I really want to live. Isn't that hilarious? Jimmy stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but the laugh broke through Jimmy's paralysis, made him move, made him run. And they ran together across that beach, through the bodies, through the blood, through the bullets that sang past their heads like angry hornets. They made it to the seawall, collapsed behind it, gasping, shaking, alive. Jimmy looked at Mike with something between gratitude and horror. You're insane, Jimmy said. Mike was still grinning, still laughing, even though his hands were shaking and his legs felt like water. Maybe, Mike said, but we're alive. That's all that matters. From that day forward, Jimmy Cole followed Mike Brennan through hell itself. Followed him because Mike had dragged him off that beach. Because Mike had shown him that laughter could be a weapon against fear. Because Mike had become the big brother Jimmy needed to survive. They fought through Normandy, through hedgerows where German machine gunners turned every field into a killing ground. Through villages where civilians cheered them as liberators while German snipers took shots from church steeples. Through the long, grinding push toward Germany. Mike's reputation grew. The ghost, they called him. The man who laughed at death. Who carried enough grenades to start his own war. Who survived things that should have killed him 10 times over. In September 1944, during the liberation of Belgium, their unit got pinned down in a flooded town. German machine gun nest had them trapped. Sergeant Cross took a burst to the chest. Went down hard, bleeding out in the icy water. Mike didn't think. Didn't plan, just grabbed 4 grenades and charged. The other soldiers watched in horror and awe as Mike ran straight at the German position. Laughing. Actually laughing as bullets kicked up water around him. He threw grenades with precision, timed throws, each explosion exactly where it needed to be. The machine gun went silent. Mike dragged Sergeant Cross back to safety. Cross survived. Barely. When he was stable enough to talk, he looked at Mike with something like fear in his eyes. Brennan, you're not right in the head, Cross said. Mike just smiled. Nobody here is Sarge. I'm just honest about it. But something had shifted in how the other soldiers looked at Mike. There was respect, but also distance. Like they weren't quite sure what Mike was anymore. Like he'd crossed some line between brave and something else. Something harder to name. By March 1945, the war was grinding toward its end. The 2nd Infantry Division was pushing toward the Rhine River. Germany's last great natural barrier. The final defense before the heart of the Reich itself. Mike had been in combat for 9 months straight. 9 months of watching friends die. 9 months of killing men who looked increasingly like terrified children. 9 months of carrying Jimmy Cole through hell, keeping his promise to keep the kid alive. On the night of March 11th, Mike and Jimmy shared a foxhole near the Rhine. Tomorrow they'd advance on a series of farmhouses that intelligence said were lightly defended. Easy duty, quick operation, in and out. Jimmy was nervous, more nervous than usual. He pulled out the photo of Sarah, looked at it in the dim light of their foxhole. Mike, if I don't make it, Mike cut him off. You'll make it, I'll make sure. How can you promise that? Mike touched the grenades on his webbing. 4 of them, like always, his insurance policy against the universe. Because I owe the universe a death, Mike said, and it's not going to be yours. Jimmy handed Mike the photo of Sarah. Just in case, if something happens, give this to her. Tell her I loved her. Mike took the photo, slipped it into his pocket next to his own photo of Ruth. 2 futures, 2 promises, 2 lives that deserve better than this mud and blood and endless gray death. Nothing's going to happen, Mike said. We'll both make it home. We'll both marry our girls. We'll both have families and die merry old men in our sleep. That's the deal. Jimmy smiled, the kind of smile that wanted to believe but couldn't quite manage it. Deal, Jimmy said. They shook hands in the darkness, a pact between brothers, a promise Mike would break before the sun was high the next day. March 12th dawned cold and foggy, the kind of fog that reduces the world to gray shapes and muffled sounds, the kind of fog that makes you jumpy, makes you see threats in every shadow. Intelligence had been wrong. The farmhouses weren't lightly defended. They were held by Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, elite troops, veterans who'd been fighting since North Africa, men who knew how to kill and how to damn and how to make both things as hard as possible for their enemies. Mike's squad moved through the fray toward the first farmhouse. 12 men, good men, brothers. They'd survived so much together. They thought they'd survive this too. They were 50 yards from the farmhouse when the world exploded. Machine guns from 4 positions at once. The distinctive sound of German MG-42s, 1,200 rounds per minute. So fast the individual shots blurred into one long, tearing scream. 2 men went down instantly, the rest scattered. Dove for whatever cover they could find. Mike rolled into a shallow depression in the ground. Jimmy landed in a ditch beside him. "Stay down," Mike shouted. "Don't move." But Jimmy was panicking, the same paralysis that had gripped him on Omaha Beach. The terror that made men do stupid things, made them stand up, made them run, made them die. Mike saw it happening, saw Jimmy starting to rise, reached out to grab him. "Kid, no." Too late. Jimmy stood, exposed himself for just 1 second. 1 second was enough. The German sniper's bullet caught Jimmy in the chest. Perfect shot. The kind of shot that ends arguments. Jimmy fell back into the ditch, blood spreading across his uniform. Dark red, arterial. Mike dragged him deeper into cover, pressed his hands against the wound. But he could feel Jimmy's life pouring out between his fingers, could see the light fading from his friend's eyes. "Mike," Jimmy gasped, blood on his lips. Did I do good?" Mike's voice broke. "You did perfect, kid, perfect." Jimmy tried to smile, tried to say something about Sarah, about home, about the future they'd promised each other. But the words wouldn't come, just blood, and then nothing. The photo fell from Jimmy's pocket. Sarah's smiling face stared up at Mike from the mud. Something in Mike broke in that moment. The laugh died. For the first time in years, Mike was completely silent. Just cold, just calculating, just rage given human form. He looked toward the farmhouse, toward the Germans who'd killed his brother, his responsibility, his friend, the life he'd promised to protect. "I'm going to kill every last one of them," Mike whispered. But then he realized his position. Separated from his squad by 30 yards of open ground, pinned down, Germans ahead, no way back, no way forward. Unless. The idea formed slowly. Crazy. Impossible. The kind of thing that only worked in desperate moments when conventional tactics had already failed. Mike stood up, slowly, hands rising above his head. His rifle fell to the mud beside Jimmy's body. And then Mike started to laugh again. But this laugh was different, darker. The laugh of a man who'd decided that death could have him, but only on his terms. Only after he'd settled his accounts. The German guns stopped. Confused shouts in German. Mike kept his hands high, kept laughing, kept walking toward the farmhouse like a man who'd lost his mind or found something worse. He counted them as they emerged. 19 Germans, young Captain Weber and his men, surrounding him, searching him, missing the 4 grenades hidden beneath his jacket. 4 grenades, 36 seconds, 19 men about to die. This is where our story truly begins. In a muddy farmyard in Germany, with a laughing American and confused Germans, with debts and promises and the terrible arithmetic of war. But you need to understand one more thing before we continue. Before I tell you about those 36 seconds, you need to see this moment from the other side, from the German perspective, from the eyes of the men who thought they'd captured a broken soldier, from the eyes of Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, who had no idea he was standing in a kill zone, who had 36 seconds left to live. But before those 36 seconds, before the blood and the screaming and the silence, you need to understand the other side of the story. You need to see through German eyes. Germany, 1943, Fallschirmjäger training base. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber was 32 years old when he took command of his paratrooper unit. He came from a long line of Prussian officers, men who valued discipline above all else, men who believed that proper training and iron will could overcome any obstacle, any enemy. His mentor, an old colonel who'd fought in the First World War, pulled him aside before his first deployment. "Friedrich, I know what they tell you about American soldiers," the colonel said, "that they're soft, undisciplined, that they'll break at the first real resistance." Weber nodded. This was standard doctrine. American soldiers came from a nation of plenty. They didn't have the hardness, the edge that came from suffering, from sacrifice. "Don't believe it," the colonel said quietly. "I fought Americans in 1918. Their informality hides something dangerous. They fight like individuals, yes, but individuals who've decided to win. That makes them unpredictable, lethal." Weber dismissed the warning. He was young enough to believe in his training, his men, his superiority. He'd learned different. But by then it would be too late. By March 1945, Weber's unit had fought from North Africa to Normandy to the Rhine. They'd lost men, good men, friends, brothers. But they remained professional, disciplined, elite. Weber believed in his men, believed in their training, believed that even in defeat they could make the Americans pay for every inch of German soil. On the night of March 11th, Weber positioned his 19 remaining soldiers in and around a farmhouse complex near the Rhine. His orders were simple: hold this position, delay the American advance as long as possible. Every hour they held meant another hour for other German units to establish defenses further east. He positioned his MG-42 machine guns with precision, set fields of fire, created a killing ground. His youngest soldier, Hans Müller, just 19 years old, asked him the question they were all thinking. "Herr Hauptmann, what if they don't come?" Weber allowed himself a small smile. "They'll come. Americans are predictable. They'll walk straight into our trap, and we'll be ready." He gathered his men that evening, shared his last bread with them. Standard practice. The officer eats last, takes care of his men first. "We don't fight for the politicians," Weber told them. "We don't fight for ideology. We fight for each other, for Germany, for our families just miles from here." He pulled out a photograph, his wife Greta and his daughter Anna, 4 years old. He hadn't seen her in 6 months. She wouldn't recognize him now, not with the weight he'd lost, the hardness in his eyes. Hardness in, "This is what we protect," Weber said, showing the photo. "This is why we hold." His men nodded. They understood. They all had families, parents, siblings, wives, children, all of them just beyond the Rhine, all of them depending on men like Weber to buy them time, to keep them safe just a little longer. Young Hans Muller looked at the photo with something like longing. He'd never married, never had children. At 19, he'd gone straight from Hitler Youth to the military. War was all he'd ever known. "We'll hold, Herr Hauptmann," Hans said. His voice was steady, resolute. He believed in Weber, believed in the mission, believed they could stop the Americans through superior discipline and training. Weber believed it too. He'd been taught that German soldiers were better trained, better disciplined, more committed than their enemies. It was an article of faith, the bedrock of everything he'd been told since he was Hans's age. He was wrong. But he wouldn't realize it until he was looking down at grenades landing at his feet. Until he had 3 seconds left to live and no time left to learn from his mistake. The morning of March 12th came cold and foggy, perfect conditions for an ambush. Weber's men were in position before dawn. Machine guns loaded, rifles ready, waiting. Through his binoculars, Weber watched the American squad approach. 12 men, moving cautiously through the sun. Professional, not the undisciplined rabble he'd been told to expect. "Wait for my signal," Weber whispered into the radio. "Let them get close. 50 yards, 40, 30, fire." The MG-42s opened up simultaneously. The sound was devastating. 4 machine guns pouring fire into the American position. Weber saw 2 men go down immediately. Saw the rest scatter, saw the attack stall before it began. "Good," Weber said. "Keep them pinned. We'll flank around and finish them." But then something unexpected happened. Through his binoculars, Weber saw an American soldier stand up, 30 yards ahead of the others, separated, alone. The soldier raised his hands above his head, surrendering. But something was wrong. The American was smiling, then laughing, actually laughing while surrounded by men trying to kill him. "Was ist los mit diesem Amerikaner?" Weber muttered. What's wrong with this American? He radioed his men. Hold fire. He's surrendering. Take him alive. Weber stepped out of the farmhouse. His men emerged from their positions, surrounded the laughing American, their rifles pointed at his chest. Weber studied the soldier's face. Young, maybe 24, dirty, exhausted. But the eyes. Something in the eyes made Weber uneasy. Not the look of a defeated man. Something else. Something calculating. You surrender, Ja, Weber said in broken English. The American nodded, still smiling, still laughing quietly, like he was in on some joke the rest of them hadn't heard yet. Weber ordered young Hans Muller to search the prisoner. Careful, Weber added. He might be booby-trapped. Hans approached nervously. The American's laugh unnerved him, made his hands shake as he patted down the prisoner. He found a knife, tossed it away, found spare ammunition magazines, tossed them, checked the American's pockets. Empty. Ran his hands over the chest, the back, the legs. But Hans was nervous, distracted by that eerie laugh. He didn't check carefully beneath the American's field jacket, didn't find the 4 grenades clipped to webbing underneath the folds of cloth. Is sober, Hans called out. He's clean. Weber relaxed. His men relaxed. Weapons lowered. Some of them smiled. They'd captured an enemy soldier without losing anyone. A good day. A small victory in a war that offered fewer victories each day. More men came out to see the prisoner, to look at the crazy American who'd surrendered while laughing. They clustered around. 19 men within 10 meters. All of them thinking the danger had passed. All of them wrong. Weber turned to call for more men to escort the prisoner inside. Holt mehr Männer. And in that moment, the American's smile vanished. Time becomes strange in combat. Seconds stretch. Minutes compress. Your brain processes information faster than conscious thought, faster than fear. You see everything, feel everything, remember everything. This is what happened in 36 seconds, second by second, beat by beat, life to death in the time it takes to tie your shoes. Second 0. Mike's hands dropped, the laugh died. His face went cold, expressionless. The mask fell away, and what was underneath was something the Germans had never seen before. Something their training hadn't prepared them for. Pure, calculated violence. Second 1. Mike's fingers found 2 grenade pins simultaneously. Muscle memory from 1,000 training drills. From 9 months of combat. From nights lying awake imagining exactly this scenario. The Germans were still processing. Their brains lagging behind reality, seeing Mike's hands move but not yet understanding what it meant. Not yet feeling the fear that should have made them run. Second 2. The pins came free. The safety spoons flew off with metallic pings. In Mike's peripheral vision, he saw young Hans Muller's eyes widen. Saw the boy's mouth opening to shout a warning. Too late. Far too late. Second 3. First grenade already in flight, arcing through the air toward Captain Weber and the cluster of men near the farmhouse door. Perfect throw. All those hours of training, all those grenades Mike had carried when regulations said 2 were enough. This was why. Mike's other hand was already reaching for the 3rd grenade, already moving to the next target before the first grenade had even landed. Second 4. The first grenade hit the ground at Weber's feet, bounced once, settled. Weber looked down. For a fraction of a second, his face showed perfect understanding, perfect knowledge of what was about to happen. His mouth formed a word. Scheisse. Second 5. Mike threw the second grenade toward the barn, toward the MG-42 position that had killed Jimmy, that had torn his friend apart, that had taken the life Mike had promised to protect. Already diving, already rolling, making himself a moving target, harder to hit, harder to kill. Second 6. Detonation. The first grenade exploded with a sharp crack that momentarily deafened everyone within 30 yards. The concussion wave rippled through the air like water, like a physical thing you could see if you knew where to look. Weber and 5 men around him caught the full force, shrapnel moving at speeds faster than sound. Metal fragments that punched through flesh and bone like they weren't even there. Weber died instantly, never felt it. 1 second standing, 1 second gone. His photograph of Greta and Anna fluttered to the ground stained with blood that wasn't quite his anymore. The men beside him went down like puppets with cut strings. No drama, no heroics, just sudden absence where life had been. The screaming started. Not from the dead, from the wounded, from the ones close enough to catch shrapnel but far enough to survive. To suffer, second 7 through 10, Mike rolled through the mud, grabbed a fallen Kar 98K rifle from a dead German, brought it to his shoulder even as he kept moving. Even as the second grenade flew toward the barn. In the barn, the MG-42, gunners were turning their weapon toward Mike. Heavy weapon, slow to traverse. They almost made it, almost got the barrel around in time. The grenade flew through the window. Perfect accuracy, athletic grace born from desperation and rage, and 9 months of learning how to kill efficiently. Second 11, the barn exploded from the inside. The MG-42's ammunition cooked off in a secondary explosion. Tracers zipping out into the fog like angry fireflies. The 2 gunners died in fire. Quick death. Cleaner than most. Mike had already pulled the pin on his third grenade. Still rolling, still moving. Making it impossible for the surviving Germans to draw a bead. To end this before it consumed them all, second 12 through 14, 3 Germans were trying to organize, trying to return fire. Professional soldiers doing what professional soldiers do. Adapt, overcome, fight back. The third grenade landed between them. They saw it, tried to scatter. Human reflexes against physics. Physics won. The explosion caught at all 3. Close enough that there wasn't much left to bury. Close enough that their mothers wouldn't recognize them. Close enough that death was instantaneous and absolute. Second 15 through 18. Mike rose to one knee, the Kar 98K rifle already at his shoulder, German weapon. He'd trained with captured equipment, knew the action, knew the sights, knew exactly how much pressure the trigger needed. 4 Germans behind the overturned farm cart, using it for cover, smart, disciplined, returning fire. Bullets cracking past Mike's head close enough to feel the displacement of air. Mike's last grenade, his fourth. He pulled the pin with his teeth, tasted metal and cosmoline, threw hard, put his shoulder into it. All his strength, all his hatred, all his grief for Jimmy Cole. Second 19, the grenade arced high, dropped behind the cart. No time to run, no time to throw it back, no time for anything but the sudden understanding that this was the end. Second 20 through 22, detonation 4. The farm cart disintegrated, wood and metal fragments joining the shrapnel. A storm of deadly debris that left nothing living in a 10-foot radius. 4 more Germans down, 4 more families getting telegrams, 4 more mothers learning that their sons wouldn't be coming home. 23 through 25. 2 Germans still standing, both wounded. One had caught shrapnel in his leg, the other in his arm. But they were soldiers, trained, disciplined, still trying to bring their weapons to bear, still trying to complete their mission even as their friends lay dead around them. Mike fired the Kar 98K, the crack of the rifle sharp and final. The first German fell. Perfect shot, center mass, the way they taught you in training. Bolt action, smooth, practiced. The spent casing ejected with a metallic ping. New round chambered, all of it automatic. Muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have been too slow. Second 26, second shot. The last German went down. Tried to crawl, tried to reach his rifle. Tried to keep fighting even as his life poured out into German soil. Mike didn't fire again. Didn't need to. The man would be dead in seconds. No point wasting ammunition. Second 27 through 30. Complete silence. Or what passed for silence in the aftermath of violence. The ringing in Mike's ears from the explosions. The moaning of the dying. The wet sounds of men trying to breathe through punctured lungs. Smoke swirling through the fog. The chemical smell of explosives mixing with the copper smell of blood. The burnt smell of flesh. Mike stood slowly, the rifle still in his hands, looking around at what he'd done. Bodies everywhere, scattered in clusters matching where each grenade had fallen. 19 men, some dead, some dying, none of them able to fight anymore. Second 31 through 36. Mike dropped the rifle, looked at his hands. They were steady, not shaking, not trembling, just covered in dirt, in mud, in blood that wasn't his. He'd survived. Again. Impossible. Miraculous. 19 men had been trying to kill him, and not a single bullet had found him. Not even close. The laugh was gone now, that manic, terrifying laugh that had unnerved the Germans, that had made them think he was crazy or broken. He wasn't crazy. He was just a man who'd learned to weaponize fear, his own fear, their fear. Fear as a tool, as a strategy. And now he was standing in the center of carnage. 19 Germans dead or dying because they'd made one mistake. Because young Hans Muller had been nervous and hadn't checked carefully enough beneath Mike's jacket. One mistake. 36 seconds. 19 lives. Mike counted them methodically, confirming the number, making sure. Part of him couldn't believe it. Part of him was still expecting to wake up, to find out this was another nightmare like the ones that plagued him every night. But this was real. The bodies were real. The blood was real. The weight of what he'd just done settled over him like a physical thing, heavy, inescapable. Behind him he heard shouting. English. American voices. His squad was advancing, breaking from cover now that the German guns had gone silent. Sergeant Cross arrived first, stopped dead when he saw the scene. His face went pale. He'd seen a lot in 3 years of war, but nothing quite like this. Mother of God, Cross whispered, then louder, finding his voice. Brennan, what the hell did you do? Mike's voice came out flat, empty. All the emotion burned out of it. They didn't search me properly, Sarge. The rest of the squad arrived, stared in shock. Some of them were veterans, hardened men who'd seen terrible things, but they looked at Mike differently now, like they weren't quite sure what he was, like he'd crossed some line between soldier and something else, something darker. Mike turned away, started walking toward the farmhouse, needed to clear it, standard procedure, make sure no one was hiding inside, complete the mission even though the mission was already complete. He kicked in the door, rifle up, moving through the rooms with mechanical efficiency. In the basement, he found him, Hans Mueller, the young German who'd searched him, who'd missed the grenades, who was now cowering in a corner with a wound in his arm bleeding badly. Hans looked up, saw Mike silhouetted in the doorway, saw death coming for him. His face showed pure terror, the kind of fear that strips away everything civilized and leaves only the animal underneath. Bitte, Hans whispered. Please. Bitte nicht töten. Please don't kill me. Mike raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel. His finger found the trigger. Light pressure. Just a few more pounds and it would be over. 20 Germans instead of 19. Round numbers, neat, final. He looked at Hans's face, saw terror, saw youth, saw himself at 19 before the war had burned the innocence out of him. Hans was crying now, shaking, waiting for the bullet that would end his war, end his life, end everything. Mike lowered the rifle. You're just a kid, Mike said quietly. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, pulled out his first aid kit, knelt beside Hans, started working on the wound. Efficient, professional, the same care he'd give to one of his own men. Hans stared at him in shock, not understanding, his brain unable to process this. The American had just killed his entire unit, should kill him too. That was how war worked. That was the logic of it. But Mike was bandaging his wound, stopping the bleeding, being gentle despite the violence that had preceded this moment. War rum, Hans managed to say. Why, Mike met his eyes. Because I already killed enough for one day. He pulled out his canteen, held it to Hans's lips. Let him drink. Water. Simple. Life-giving. We're not monsters, Mike said, despite what your leaders told you. Hans took the water, drank. His hands were still shaking, still expecting this to be a trick, a cruel game before the inevitable execution. But Mike just kept working, kept bandaging, kept showing mercy when he had every reason and right and justification to show none. When the wound was wrapped, Mike sat back, studied the German boy's face, saw fear, saw confusion, saw something like gratitude struggling to form. Du bist? Hans struggled for English words. You are not what they said, what they told us. Mike allowed himself a small, sad smile. Neither are you, kid. American medics arrived, took over Hans's care. Their efficiency and competence shocked the young German. He'd been told Americans were incompetent, soft, unable to do the hard things that war required. But they were professional, careful. They treated him like he was one of their own. Like the war didn't matter in that moment. Only the wound, only the suffering that could be eased. Hans watched Mike walk away. Watched the American who'd destroyed his unit and then saved his life. His mind trying to reconcile two opposite truths, unable to fit them together into something coherent. The American medic saw Hans staring. "That's Brennan," the medic said in bad German. "We call him the Ghost. He survives things that should kill him. Now you know why." Hans would lose his arm. Infection would set in over the next week. By the time proper medical care could be arranged, amputation would be the only option. He'd carry that wound for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of the day he met the laughing American. But he'd also carry something else, a truth his country had tried to hide from him, a knowledge that would change everything he thought he knew about the war, about the enemy, about himself. 36 seconds later, the 2nd Infantry Division's after-action report would document 19 German casualties, 16 killed instantly or died within minutes, 3 mortally wounded who would succumb within the hour. 1 American responsible, Private Michael Brennan, extraordinary action under fire, recommended for Medal of Honor. But the numbers couldn't capture what had really happened, couldn't explain how one man had turned surrender into the deadliest counterattack of the entire Rhine campaign. Couldn't quantify the weight that 19 deaths would place on one man's conscience for the next 53 years. Sergeant Cross filed his report. Private Brennan saved the entire squad through unprecedented tactical action. His use of concealed ordnance against a numerically superior force demonstrated exceptional courage and resourcefulness. But when Cross talked to Mike later, away from the officers and the official reports, his words were different. "I've seen men do impossible things in this war, Brennan. But what you did today, that wasn't just impossible. That was something else." "What was it, Sarge?" Cross was quiet for a long time. "Terrifying," he finally said. "You terrified them. You terrified me, and I'm on your side." Mike sat alone after that, pulled out 2 photographs, Jimmy Cole and his girl Sarah. Sarah smiling at a camera, unaware that the man who loved her was already dead, unaware that Mike had failed to keep his promise, had let Jimmy die. The second photograph was his own, Ruth, waiting for him in Montana, writing letters every week, believing he'd come home, believing they'd have that future they dreamed about. Mike folded both photos carefully, put them back in his pocket, next to his heart. 2 futures, one impossible now, one uncertain. He looked at his hands, still steady, still not shaking, the hands that had thrown 4 grenades in 6 seconds, that had killed 19 men in the time it took to recite a prayer. These were his hands now. These were what the war had made them, tools for ending lives, instruments of violence so efficient it frightened even his own comrades. The debt he'd carried since Jack Sullivan's death. It hadn't been paid through his survival. It had only multiplied, 19-fold. The universe didn't work that way. You couldn't trade lives like currency. You couldn't balance one death against 19 others and call the scales even. He'd survived. Jimmy hadn't. 19 Germans hadn't. And Mike was still here, still breathing, still carrying weight that got heavier with every passing moment. That night, Mike made a simple sketch in his field notebook. 19 small shapes, grenades, 1 for each German, a permanent record, a debt he'd never be able to repay, a weight he'd carry until the day he died. The other soldiers started to avoid him. Not obviously, not overtly, but there was distance now, space that hadn't been there before. They respected him, maybe feared him a little, but they didn't want to get too close. Like violence was contagious. Like what Mike had become might rub off on them. Only Sergeant Cross still treated him the same. Still called him Brennan instead of Ghost. Still sat with him when everyone else found reasons to be somewhere else. "You know they're recommending you for the Medal of Honor," Cross said one evening. Mike just nodded. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel like they should give it to Jimmy Cole," Mike said. "He's the one who deserves it. Jimmy got himself killed by standing up when he should have stayed down. He got killed trying to be brave. I got 19 men killed trying to survive." Cross lit a cigarette, offered one to Mike. They smoked in silence for a while. War doesn't give medals for the right reasons, Cross finally said. It gives medals for results. You got results. Is that what we call it? Results? What would you call it? Mike was quiet for a long time. A debt I'll never be able to pay. 3 weeks passed, the war ground forward. The 2nd Infantry Division pushed deeper into Germany. Every day brought them closer to the heart of the Reich. Every day felt like it should be the last day. But the killing continued. Mike stopped laughing. The other soldiers noticed. The ghost who'd found humor in the face of death had gone silent. He moved through combat like a machine now. Efficient, cold, deadly, but empty. In early April, Mike and another soldier were on patrol in a small German town. The war was collapsing. German units were surrendering by the thousands, but some still fought, some still believed, some still killed. The sniper's bullet came from a church steeple. Perfect shot. The soldier beside Mike dropped instantly, dead before he hit the ground. Another friend, another face Mike would carry. Mike didn't freeze, didn't hesitate, located the sniper's position through the muzzle flash, put 3 rounds into the bell tower, heard the body fall, heard it hit the street below with a wet sound that used to bother him but didn't anymore. He walked over to the dead sniper. Old man, maybe 50, probably a civilian who'd grabbed his hunting rifle and decided to take one more American with him. One more act of defiance before the end. Mike looked at the old man's face, tried to feel something, anger, satisfaction, anything. But there was just emptiness. Just the hollow place where emotions used to live before the war burned them out. Sergeant Cross found him there, standing over the body, staring. "Brennan, you all right?" Mike didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I don't remember how to feel a thing, Sarge. I look at dead men and I don't feel anything anymore." "Is that normal?" Cross put a hand on his shoulder. "Nothing about this is normal, son. We'll sort it out when we get home." Will we ever really get home? Or did we leave parts of ourselves in the mud that we'll never get back? Cross didn't have an answer for that. April 28, 1945. Liberation. The 2nd Infantry Division helped liberate a small concentration camp. Nothing like the massive death factories at Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen. Just a smaller labor camp, a footnote in the larger horror. But small didn't matter when you saw it, when you smelled it, when you walked through gates that said Arbeit macht frei and saw what lay beyond. Walking skeletons, human beings reduced to bones and skin and eyes that had seen too much, bodies stacked like cordwood, mass graves half filled, gas chambers disguised as showers, the machinery of industrialized murder laid bare. Mike had thought he'd seen the worst of what humans could do to each other. 9 months of combat, 9 months of killing and dying, 9 months of believing he understood the depths to which men could sink. He'd been wrong. A woman approached him, Jewish, maybe 40 years old, maybe 20. Impossible to tell. Starvation and suffering had aged her beyond counting. She wore striped prisoner clothing that hung on her frame like a shroud. She reached out with skeletal hands, touched Mike's face. Her fingers were ice cold. "Are you real?" she whispered in accented English. "Or am I dreaming again?" Mike's voice caught in his throat. He managed to nod. "We're real, ma'am. You're safe now." The woman collapsed into his arms, sobbing, her body so light he could barely feel the weight, like holding a ghost, like holding nothing at all. And Mike cried, for the first time since Jimmy died, for the first time in years. Great racking sobs that shook his whole body, all the grief he'd been holding, all the horror, all the weight of 19 Germans and Jimmy and Jack Sullivan and every other death that had brought him to this moment. He cried for all of it, and he couldn't stop. Other soldiers moved through the camp, faces hard, eyes wet. Strong men reduced to tears by what they found, by the realization of what they had been fighting against, what they'd been stopping. Mike sat with the woman until medics came, held her while she cried, while she told him things he'd never forget, things that would join his nightmares, things that made 19 dead Germans seem like mercy instead of murder. That night, Mike couldn't sleep, kept seeing her face, kept seeing the bodies, kept trying to reconcile the Germans he'd killed with the Germans who'd built this place. Were they the same? Were some of Weber's men good men forced to fight? Were some true believers who would have staffed these camps if given the chance? He'd never know. That was the burden. The 19 men he'd killed. He'd never know which ones deserved it, which ones were just boys following orders, which ones believed in the horror, and which ones were trapped by it. Sergeant Cross found him sitting alone, staring at nothing. Asking yourself if the men you killed deserved it, Cross asked. Mike nodded. I can't answer that, son. Maybe some did. Maybe none of them. War doesn't give us time to sort it out. We kill or we die. That's the arithmetic of it. I killed 19 men in 36 seconds, Mike said. I didn't ask them their politics. Didn't ask if they believed in this. He gestured toward the camp. I just killed them because they were in my way. And if you hadn't, they'd have killed me, killed you, killed the whole squad. Then you did what you had to do. That's all any of us can do. But it didn't feel like enough. It didn't balance the scales. It didn't make the weight any lighter. May 8th, 1945, VE Day, Holland. The war in Europe ended on a Tuesday. Church bells rang. People danced in the streets. Soldiers embraced and cried and drank themselves senseless. The killing was over. They'd survived. They were going home. Mike sat alone in his tent, looking at two things: Jimmy's photograph of Sarah and the sketch he'd made. 19 small grenades, one for each life he'd taken. Sergeant Cross entered without knocking. War's over, Brennan. Come celebrate. Can't, Sarge. Why not? Because it's not over for me. Don't think it ever will be. Cross sat down beside him. Two veterans, two survivors, two men carrying weights that would never fully lift. It's not over for any of us, Cross said quietly. We'll carry this until we die. But we survived. That counts for something. Does it? I survived. Jimmy didn't. 19 Germans didn't. What does it mean? It means you have time to figure that out. They don't. Mike learned that week that his Medal of Honor recommendation had been downgraded to a Silver Star. The reason was technical. His fake surrender could be interpreted as a violation of the Geneva Convention. Ruse of war versus perfidy. A fine line that lawyers argued about while Mike just felt relieved. He didn't want a medal, didn't want recognition, didn't want to stand on a stage while people celebrated him for killing 19 men. Even if those 19 men had been trying to kill him. Even if he'd had no choice. The ceremony was brief. A general pinned the Silver Star to his chest, said words about valor and sacrifice and extraordinary action under fire. Words that felt hollow, empty, like they were talking about someone else. Some hero from a story instead of Mike Brennan from Montana who'd killed men and couldn't forget their faces. When the general stepped back and saluted, Mike said quietly, "Sir, with respect, I don't want this." The general blinked. "Private, the men who deserve medals are dead. I'm just the one who survived. Private Brennan, they died so you could live. Honor them by accepting this, by living well." Mike wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that living well seemed impossible when you carried 19 ghosts. But he just nodded, accepted the medal, went back to his tent and put it in a drawer and tried not to think about it. September 1945. The troop ship crossed the Atlantic. Mike stood at the rail watching the Statue of Liberty grow larger on the horizon. Other soldiers cheered, whistled, cried with joy. They were home, safe. The war was behind them. Mike felt nothing, just watched the statue and wondered if he'd left too much of himself in Europe to ever really come home. If the man standing at this rail was just a hollow shell wearing Mike Brennan's face. His father met him at the train station in Montana, stood on the platform in his work clothes. Aged 10 years in the three, Mike had been gone. When Mike stepped off the train, his father's face crumpled, seeing what the war had done to his son, seeing the emptiness in his eyes. They embraced. Mike's father held him tight, like he could squeeze the war out of him through sheer force of will, through love, through the stubborn refusal to accept that his boy was gone and only a soldier remained. "Welcome home, son," his father said. "It's over now." Mike wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that crossing an ocean and changing clothes could make it over. But he knew better. "Is it, Dad? Is it really over?" His father pulled back, looked at Mike's face, saw something there that made him nod slowly, sadly. No, son, I suppose it's not, but you're home. That's something. Ruth was waiting at the ranch. She'd kept the place running while Mike was gone, kept his room exactly as he'd left it, kept believing he'd come back, that they'd have the future they'd promised each other. When she saw him, she ran, threw her arms around him, kissed him like she could erase 3 years of war with love and faith and stubborn hope. Mike held her, breathed in her scent, tried to feel something, tried to reconnect with the part of himself that had loved her, that had dreamed of this moment through months of mud and blood and death. But it was like trying to feel through layers of ice. Like his emotions were there somewhere but buried too deep to reach. They married in December. Small ceremony. Just family. Mike wore his uniform. Ruth wore her mother's dress. They said their vows in the same church where they'd been baptized as children, where they'd sat through Sunday services dreaming of growing up and getting out and seeing the world. Mike had seen the world, had seen too much of it, had seen things he could never unsee, could never share with Ruth because she'd been here safe while he'd been there killing. The wedding night, Mike woke screaming. Nightmare. Weber's face looking down at the grenade. Hans crying in the basement. Jimmy's blood in the mud. All of them demanding answers Mike couldn't give. Ruth held him, rocked him, whispered that it was over, that he was safe, that she was here. But Mike couldn't explain, couldn't tell her that safe didn't exist anymore, that the war lived in him now, that every night he went back to that farmyard and killed those men again and again and couldn't stop. Tell me what you saw, Ruth said. Let me help. You can't help. You weren't there. Then make me understand. I can't. If I told you what I did, what I see, what I became, you'd leave. You'd have to. Ruth's voice was firm. Try me. But Mike couldn't. The words wouldn't come. How do you tell the woman you love that you killed 19 men in 36 seconds, that you showed mercy to one, and he's the one you think about, that you can't remember how to feel things anymore, so he stayed silent, built walls, pushed her away without meaning to, lived in the same house but separated by an ocean of things he couldn't say. He worked the ranch, dawn to dusk, physical labor that exhausted him enough that sometimes he could sleep. Sometimes he could go a whole night without the screaming, without Ruth waking him with tears in her eyes and fear on her face. He built things, a new barn, fences, corrals, anything that required his hands and his back and his strength. Creation instead of destruction. Building instead of breaking. Like he could balance the scales through sheer physical effort, through enough nails and boards and sweat. In the barn away from the house where Ruth might see Mike built something else. A memorial. 19 stones arranged in a circle. One white cross in the center. Jimmy's name carved into it. Mike would sit there at night, 3 in the morning when the nightmares wouldn't let him sleep. Sit with his dead, with the men he'd killed and the friend he'd failed to save. Ruth found him there one night, followed him when he slipped out of bed, stood in the barn doorway, watching him sit among the stones. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside him, put her head on his shoulder, waited. I killed them, Mike finally said. All 19, in less than a minute, and I can't undo it. No, Ruth said, you can't. So what do I do? How do I live with it? Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then you live a life that honors them. You build instead of destroy. You create life instead of taking it. You show mercy where you can, kindness where you can. You make their deaths mean something by living well. How do I do that? One day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of creation at a time. Mike looked at the stones, at Jimmy's cross, at the weight of 19 lives pressing down on him. I don't know if I can. You can, Ruth said, because you're not doing it alone. They sat together in the darkness, among the dead, among the ghosts. And slowly, very slowly, Mike began to believe that maybe she was right. Maybe he could live with it, not forget it, not erase it, but carry it without being crushed by it. The years passed. Mike and Ruth had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. Mike taught them to ride horses, to mend fences, to keep their word, to choose kindness over cruelty, to build instead of destroy. He never told them about the war. When they asked what he did, he just said, "I was a soldier," changed the subject, kept the darkness away from them, protected them from the weight he carried. But they knew something, saw it in the way he'd wake screaming some nights, in the way he'd stare at nothing with haunted eyes, in the way he'd flinch at loud noises, at fireworks, at anything that sounded like gunfire. His oldest son asked him once when he was 12, "Dad, were you a hero in the war?" Mike thought about that question for a long time, thought about 36 seconds, about 19 dead men, about mercy shown to a German boy named Hans who'd lost his arm because Mike had spared his life instead of ending it. "No, son, I wasn't a hero. I just did what I had to do to survive." "But you got a medal." "Medals don't make you a hero. They just mean you survived when others didn't." Do you ever think about it? The war on them, every day, son, every single day. 1952, 7 years later. Mike was 31 years old. The ranch was prosperous. His children were healthy. Ruth loved him despite the walls he'd built, despite the nightmares, despite the darkness he couldn't fully shake. He'd learned to live with the weight, not happily, not easily, but he'd learned. Built 19 structures on the ranch over 7 years. A barn, fences, corrals, a well, a smokehouse, a storage shed, a chicken coop, a stable, a root cellar, a workshop, a granary, a hayloft, a spring house, a tool shed, a wood shed, a potting shed, a milk house, a feed room, a tack room, 19 acts of creation to balance 19 moments of destruction. He'd helped other veterans too, men who came back broken, who couldn't sleep, who couldn't adjust, who carried their own weights and their own ghosts. Mike would sit with them, share coffee, share silence, share the understanding that only came from being there, from knowing. He never spoke at length about what he'd done, but word had gotten around. The ghost, the man who'd killed 19 Germans in 36 seconds. The legend had grown, been embellished, been turned into something it wasn't. So when the 2nd Infantry Division announced their 7-year reunion in Denver, Mike almost didn't go, didn't want to be celebrated, didn't want to relive it, didn't want to see the faces of men who'd been there, who knew what he'd become in those 36 seconds. But Ruth insisted, "You need to see them. They're the only ones who understand." So Mike agreed, drove to Denver, checked into the hotel where 200 veterans had gathered. Men in their 30s now, civilians, businessmen, fathers, husbands, men trying to build lives on top of the ruins of what the war had made them. Sergeant Cross was there, older, grayer, running a hardware store in Pennsylvania. He embraced Mike like a brother. "Brennan, never thought you'd come." "Almost didn't. Glad you did. Men have been asking about you, about what happened at the farmhouse." Mike's jaw tightened. "I don't want to talk about it. They want you to speak, tell the story, help them understand." Understand what? How to kill 19 men in 36 seconds, that's not something they need to understand. "No," Cross said. "They need to understand how to live with what we did, how to carry it, how to build something after." "You're doing that. They need to hear it." Mike wanted to refuse, wanted to get in his truck and drive back to Montana, back to his safe walls, his controlled life, his carefully maintained distance from the war. But before he could speak, the ballroom door opened. A man walked in, thin, one arm, wearing American clothes, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to do everything left-handed. The man's eyes scanned the room, locked on Mike, and Mike's breath caught in his throat. Hans Mueller, the German boy from the basement, the one Mike had spared, the one who'd lost his arm to infection after that day in March 1945. Hans walked across the room, every eye on him. 200 veterans watching a former enemy approach their comrade, tension filling the space, old instincts rising, old hatred stirring. Hans stopped in front of Mike, extended his one hand. "Mr. Brennan," Hans said. His English was good, practiced, American accented. "I am Hans Mueller. You saved my life in 1945. Mike stared, unable to process this, unable to believe that one of his 19 ghosts had just walked through the door. Except Hans wasn't a ghost, was alive, was here, was holding out his hand like this was normal, like 7 years could erase a war. Mike's hand shook as he gripped Hans's. You're alive, because you chose mercy over revenge. The room was completely silent. 200 men holding their breath, watching this impossible moment, this reunion between killer and survivor, between American and German, between two men connected by 36 seconds of violence and 1 moment of mercy. Hans turned to address the room, his voice steady, clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. You killed my captain, my friends, my comrades. Hans looked around the room, at the faces of men who'd fought against Germany, who'd killed Germans, who'd lost friends to Germans. And you had every right to kill me too. I was your enemy. Veterans shifted uncomfortably, not sure where this was going, not sure if they should intervene. Protect Mike, throw the German out. But you stopped, Hans continued. You bandaged my wound. You gave me water. You showed me that Americans were not the monsters we were told. He pulled out photographs, showed them to the room. I immigrated to America 5 years ago. I am a carpenter in New York. This is my wife, Anna. These are my daughters, Emma and Sarah. He showed the photos to Mike specifically. This family exists because you chose humanity. Because in that basement, when you had every reason to end my life, you chose differently. Hans's voice grew stronger, more passionate. I came to thank you and to tell these men something important. He turned back to the assembled veterans. You were not fighting Germans. You were fighting an evil idea that hijacked my country. The men you killed, some were good men forced to fight. Some were true believers. You couldn't sort it out in battle. You did what you had to. But what matters is what you do after. Mr. Brennan showed me that America is great not because it never does terrible things in war. It's great because it shows mercy when it can, because it rebuilds, because it helps even its enemies become something better. Thank you for defeating the Nazis, and thank you for showing us a better way afterward. The room erupted, not in anger, in emotion. Veterans crying, standing, applauding. 7 years of guilt and weight and wondering if what they'd done had been worth it. And here was a German, a former enemy, thanking them, telling them it mattered. Mike broke down completely. 7 years of holding it together, 7 years of carrying 19 ghosts, and one of them was standing in front of him. Alive, grateful, American. They embraced, Mike and Hans, former enemies, connected by violence and mercy, by 36 seconds that had changed both their lives forever. I'm sorry I killed your friends, Mike said through tears. I'm sorry war made you have to, Hans replied. The room gave them space. Let them have their moment. Two men finding something like peace in each other's presence. Finding proof that mercy mattered, that kindness survived, that the war hadn't won, hadn't turned them all into monsters. Later, much later, the veterans asked Mike to speak, to tell his story, to help them understand. Mike stood at the podium, looked out at 200 faces. Men who'd been there, who knew, who carried their own weights, their own ghosts. He took a breath, started to speak. They asked me to talk about the day I killed 19 German soldiers in 36 seconds, Mike said. His voice was steady, clear. Hans just gave you the German perspective. Now I'll give you mine. The room was completely silent. Every man leaning forward, listening. I wasn't a hero that day. I was terrified. I just watched my best friend die in front of me, and I was angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Mike's hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. People want to know how I did it. The truth, I used their confidence against them. I made them think I was broken. And when they relaxed, I killed them. Some of the veterans nodded. They understood. They'd done similar things, made similar choices, carried similar weights. Was it brave? I don't know. Was it necessary? Probably. Does it haunt me? Mike paused. Every single day. He pulled out the sketch from his pocket, the one he'd made that night in March 1945. 19 small grenades, worn now, creased, but still there. I thought killing those 19 men would balance some cosmic scale, that it would pay back the debt I owed for a man who died because of my mistake back home. He shook his head. It didn't. It just added 19 more deaths. Mike looked at Hans, standing at the back of the room, his one arm crossed over his chest. But Hans taught me something today. Something I've been trying to learn for 7 years. Mike's voice caught. You can't undo what war makes you do. You can only try to build something better with the time you have left. He set the sketch on the podium. Let them see it. Every one of those 19 Germans had a mother. Some had ways, kids. I took them away from their families. That's a weight I'll carry until I die. The room was so quiet you could hear breathing. Hear the rustle of uniforms as men shifted in their seats. But if this story has any value, it's this. Mike stood straighter. We survived. Not because we were better killers, though sometimes we were. We survived because when the killing stopped, we showed mercy. We rebuilt. We fed our enemies. We helped Germany become a democracy. He looked around the room, met eyes, saw tears on hard faces. That's what makes us Americans. Not the 36 seconds of violence, the 7 years of building that comes after. The choice to show mercy when we don't have to. The decision to help instead of hate. Mike's voice grew stronger, more certain. I've built 19 things on my ranch in 7 years. A barn, fences, corrals, a well, a smokehouse, 15 other structures. One for each German, 19 acts of creation to balance 19 moments of destruction. Some of the veterans were crying now, nodding, understanding. That's my message to you. If you survived, you owe it to the ones who didn't to live a life worth the cost. Not to forget them, but to honor them by being better than the war made us. Mike stepped back from the podium, started to sit down. The room erupted, standing ovation. 200 men on their feet, applauding, crying, some of them embracing each other. 7 years of weightlifting. Just a little. Just enough to breathe. Sergeant Cross was the first to reach Mike, pulled him into a bear hug. That's the speech we needed, Brennan, Cross said, his voice thick with emotion. That's the one that actually helps. The next morning, Mike took Hans out to the ranch, drove him through Montana's big sky country, showed him the land, the mountains, the endless horizon. They pulled up to the barn. Mike led Hans inside. Hans stopped when he saw it. The memorial, 19 stones arranged in a perfect circle, one white cross in the center with Jimmy's name carved into it. You remembered them all, Hans whispered. Every single one, Mike said, even though I never knew their names. Hans walked slowly around the circle, his fingers trailing over the stones. Then he knelt, started placing wildflowers he'd picked along the drive on each stone, one flower for each man. This would be Weber, Hans said, touching one stone. And this Schmidt, this one Hoffman. He went around the circle, naming them, giving them back their identities. Werner, Becker, Fischer, Zimmermann, Richter, Schneider, Bauer, Koch, Wagner, Schultz, Meyer, Klein, Wolf, Neumann, Lang, Braun. And this was my friend Carl. We trained together. He was going to be a teacher after the war. Mike knelt beside him, both men crying now. They were my comrades, Hans said. They died in war. That's all. Just war. Mike added his own flowers to Jimmy's cross. He was my brother. He died trying to be brave. That's all. They sat together in the barn, among the dead, among the stones. Two men on opposite sides of a war that had tried to make them hate each other, and failed. Do you still have nightmares? Hans asked. Every night, Mike said. Every night. Guess some wars never end. Hans looked at him. No, but we don't fight them alone anymore. They sat in silence for a long time, the Montana wind whistling through the barn, the sun streaming through cracks in the boards, dust motes dancing in the light. Finally, Hans spoke again. You asked if you balanced the scale, yes. Mike nodded. You didn't balance it, Hans said. You tipped it toward good, toward mercy, toward the kind of world worth building. Mike wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that 7 years of building could outweigh 36 seconds of destruction. That showing mercy to one German boy could somehow redeem killing 19 German men. Maybe it could, maybe it couldn't, but it was all he had, and it would have to be enough. 1982, a military historian sat across from Mike Brennan and Hans Mueller in Mike's ranch house, a tape recorder running between them, capturing their voices, their story, their truth. The historian had spent 2 years tracking them down, had heard the legend, the ghost who killed 19 Germans in 36 seconds, the German survivor who became an American, the impossible friendship born from violence and mercy. Now he wanted the real story, for the record, for history. Mr. Brennan, the historian said, people call you a hero. How do you feel about that? Mike was 61 now, silver-haired, weathered by 6 decades of Montana sun and wind, but his eyes were the same, still haunted, still carrying weight. I'm not a hero, Mike said, his voice rough but steady. Heroes are people who had a choice and chose right. I just tried to survive, and I did at a terrible cost. But you showed mercy to Hans when you could have killed him. Mike glanced at Hans, his old friend, his former enemy, the proof that mercy mattered. That's the only part I'm proud of, Mike said. Not the killing, the mercy. That's the only moment from that day I can look at without shame. The historian turned to Hans. And you, Mr. Mueller, what do you want people to know about Mike Brennan? Hans leaned forward, his empty sleeve pinned carefully. He was 56 now, a master carpenter despite the missing arm, an American citizen for 30 years, a father, a grandfather. Mike Brennan saved my life twice, Hans said. Once in that basement when he chose not to shoot, and once when he showed me that my country had lied to us about what Americans were really like. That second salvation changed everything. He smiled at Mike. My friend here thinks he owes the world a debt, that he took 19 lives and can never balance the scales. Mike nodded. That weight never lifted. Not really. But I tell him, Hans continued, those 19 men, some would have become good people after the war. Some would have stayed bitter. We'll never know, but I know this. Because Mike showed mercy to me, I had the chance to become something better than what the war made me. Hans pulled out a photograph, showed it to the camera, to the historian, to posterity. My children, my grandchildren, all Americans, all living good lives, building things, creating things. That's Mike's real legacy, not the killing. The life he allowed to continue. The historian asked them to describe that day in March 1945, to walk through the 36 seconds, to explain the weight they'd carried for 37 years. They did, haltingly, painfully. 2 old men reliving the worst moments of their lives, for history, for understanding, so that maybe someone somewhere could learn something from their suffering. When they finished, the historian asked one final question. If you could change anything about that day, what would it be? Mike and Hans looked at each other, a long look, carrying decades of friendship, of understanding, of shared weight. I wish Jimmy Cole had stayed down, Mike said quietly. I wish Weber had listened to his mentor about Americans. I wish the war had never happened. I wish a lot of things. But wishing doesn't change anything, Hans added. We live with what happened. We build with what remains. That's all we can do. Mike nodded. That's all anyone can do. The historian clicked off the recorder. Thanked them, left with hours of tape, the raw, unvarnished truth of what war does to men, how it breaks them, and how sometimes mercy can put a few pieces back together. After he left, Mike and Hans sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the Rockies, drinking coffee, comfortable in the silence of old friends who've said everything that needs saying. Think we balanced it, Mike asked. The question he'd been asking for 37 years. Hans considered. I think we did better than balance it. I think we built something good from the rubble. That counts for something. Does it count for 19 lives? Maybe not, but it counts for mine, and that's not nothing. Mike smiled, a real smile, not the manic laugh of the ghost, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd done his best with an impossible burden. No, Mike agreed, that's not nothing. 1998. Autumn. Michael Brennan died on a Tuesday, heart attack, quick, painless. He was 77 years old, had lived 53 years past the day he should have died in a German farmyard. Ruth was with him, holding his hand, their children and grandchildren nearby. A good death, as good as death gets. His last words were a question. The same question he'd been asking for 53 years. Did I balance the scale? Ruth squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. You did more than balance it, my love. You tipped it toward good, toward mercy, toward everything that matters. Mike smiled, squeezed back, and let go. Hans Muller flew from New York to Montana for the funeral. 73 years old, still working, still building, still living the life Mike's mercy had given him. He stood at the graveside, surrounded by Mike's family, his 4 children, his 9 grandchildren, all of them living proof that Mike Brennan had done more than survive. He'd built something, created something, left the world better than he found it. Hans placed 19 stones around the coffin, one for each German who died that day, one for each weight Mike had carried. For the 19 who fell, Hans said quietly, and the one who remembered them all. Ruth touched his shoulder. He balanced it, Hans. He really did. Hans nodded. No, Ruth. He didn't balance it. He tipped it toward mercy, toward kindness, toward the kind of world we need. They buried Mike next to the barn, next to his memorial, where he'd sit with his ghost for 53 years, where he'd learned to carry weight without being crushed by it. The headstone was simple, no mention of medals, no mention of the war, just the facts of a life lived. Michael Brennan, 1921 to 1998. He survived 36 seconds of war. He spent 53 years building peace. Epilogue, Montana present day. The ranch still stands, run by Mike's grandchildren now. The barn is still there, the memorial still intact. 19 stones, one white cross, all carefully maintained. Tour groups come sometimes. History buffs, veterans, people who heard the story and wanted to see where it happened, where mercy was shown, where weight was carried, where one man proved that you could survive hell and still choose kindness. On this particular autumn afternoon, 2 young people stand at the memorial. A woman in her 20s, American, Mike's great-granddaughter, and a young man, also in his 20s, German, Hans Muller's great-grandson. They're the same age, 24. The same age Mike and Hans were when their lives intersected in violence and mercy. But these 2 never knew war, never had to choose between killing and dying, never had to carry the weight their great-grandfathers carried. They're here together, friends, connected by a story that happened 80 years ago. By 36 seconds, that changed everything. The young woman places flowers on Jimmy's cross. The young man places flowers on the 19 stones, neither of them speaking, both of them understanding something important. War ends, but the choices we make during it echo forward, through generations, through time, building either walls or bridges. Mike Brennan chose to build a bridge. With mercy, with kindness, with 53 years of saying yes to life instead of death. And that choice ripples forward. Still, always, the 2 young people walk back toward the ranch house, laughing, planning their futures, living the lives their great-grandfathers bought with blood and mercy and 53 years of building. In the barn, the Montana wind whistles through the boards. The sun streams through the cracks. Dust motes dance in the light. And if you listen closely, you might hear something. Not laughter, not screaming, not the sounds of war, just peace hard-won, carefully built, maintained by remembering. The war ended in 1945. But for Mike Brennan, the real battle lasted 53 years. The battle for his soul, for redemption, for proof that mercy matters. And in the end, he won.